Sekeres Price from Wall Center, and today's Bulldog poll question: should the Canucks give Brock Boeser one more chance? You can vote yes or no at Sekeres and Price on Twitter. Bulldog, your source, free casino games, poker strategy, and sports odds. Bulldog, line of the day for me. Said I like the Avalanche in the series against the Kraken. So a 4-game sweep. Want to put down $100? You win $550. You think Seattle will get a game? 5-game series pays out at $325 on your Bulldog line of the day. Here he is, one half of the Rink-Wide Duo with Andrew Wadden. Canucks reporter Jeff Paterson was busy during the weekend taking in locker cleanout day Saturday at Rogers Arena. Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing well, guys.
Let's start with Brock Boeser in the poll question. Should they give him one more chance? And how surprised were you to hear him say he doesn't want to be traded and that not getting dealt was a blessing in disguise?
Yeah, I don't think I was surprised by it. I will say that it was about as forceful a comment as we've heard from Brock Boeser, who generally doesn't make a lot of waves. Even when he was, nearly a healthy scratch under Bruce Boudreau there in December, you could tell he was frustrated, but he didn't lash out necessarily. But this seemed pretty strong and emphatic in his desire to be here. And look, I think he does. I think this is the team that drafted him. I think there's unfinished business, to steal their slogan. He wants to see this thing through. He's never played a playoff game at Rogers Arena as one of the longest-serving Canucks now that Bo Horvat's no longer here. So, I believe it. On a human level, he's friends. These are his friends. I think he wants to be here. That said, it's out of his control. He can say what he wants. He made his case there the other day. Whether that was messaging through the media to management, ultimately, I don't think anything's changed in my mind. If Brock Boeser, the person, is back here next year, I've always enjoyed my dealings with him. But I think with that contract that it's still a priority, and I don't think the conversation changes. I do think that after the trade deadline, he knew that he couldn't be touched for a couple of months, and I think that freed him up to, play some of his best hockey of the season. But they're still in a cap crunch. I mean, nothing has changed on that front, and so that remains one of those contracts that if they can move off of it, I think they will here. And the question is, will there be a taker? Would they have to retain? Again, we've had this discussion so many times, and we're right back to square one with Brock Boeser and his future here in Vancouver.
I just want to follow up. So for those who didn't hear it, or those just catching up with the Canucks, you think this was genuine, right? Like, you don't think this was a guy resigned to the fact that, my contract may suck and be untradeable, and so let me just go out there and say all the right things about wanting to be a Canuck. You think he has genuinely had a change of heart here on Vancouver?
Look, he has to know, and I'm sure he's been in constant contact with his agent throughout this, that, they've been trying to shop him, and there haven't been any takers. Again, some of it perhaps the underachieving player, but so much of it is the contract. And so he didn't come out and go full Roberto Luongo and tell us that his contract sucks, because guess what? Twice a month in hockey season, that contract looks pretty good. 15th and 31st of each month when he checks his bank statement, that's money that he's owed, and that part's not going to change. So, I don't think he minds the contract that much, but in terms of his agent being able to broker any sort of deal, it's been a hindrance. And again, nothing has changed. 1 year off the books, but 2 still there. And sure, I mean, he finished with, almost a career high in points. And again, it's the underwhelming goal total that you're always sort of drawn to. I'm sure it'll be the same conversations, though, heading into next season, whether it's here or a new lease on life. The talk of 30 goals will come up yet again. And we know that the closest he got was his rookie season. He followed it up with a 26-goal season, but really since then hasn't scared 30 goals and, didn't even get to 20 this season. So, I'm not sure that this was so much a change of heart. It's just an honest response to a question of, this guy wants to be here. But the economic reality is that the hockey club has to change. It has to address the cap situation. And there are only a handful of options, and he remains one of them. So let's see where this goes.
I'm just getting word now they actually get paid bi-weekly.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Right.
Some months it's 3 times.
Months, sure.
I think what you're saying is right, that he probably gets to lay the land in the league and thinks that, where I am is better than being wanted by nobody. But I think there's also, and the fans certainly are being guilty of this too, of thinking this team is undefeated already, to start the season here. There is optimism, and you know what? I don't begrudge it, but I think what Boeser's also saying is, I like what I saw at the end of the season too. And these are my friends, and we're starting to look like we've figured out how to win a little bit. And again, we all know the context of when they were winning here at the end of the season, but I think he's convinced himself too that this is a team that has some sort of direction to start next year.
Yeah, now, I don't put this at his feet, certainly, but his performance, or lack thereof, has led to the dismissal of 2 head coaches now in recent years. When Travis Green got fired in December of 2021, Brock Boeser had 4 goals that season at the time of the coaching change. 4 goals, 2 months into the season. And then Bruce came in and gave him a big hug, and he got the Bruce bump. But he got off to a dreadful start again this year. Now, there were circumstances with the hand injury at training camp and missing the preseason and then having the wound open up again. But another really slow start. So, he has to look himself in the mirror. If he's back next year, there's a pretty good chance that Ilya Paterson is going to pick up where he left off, and Quinn Hughes is going to do what he does. And JT Miller, it was a tough start for him, but he got things sorted out at the end and finished with over 80 points. What's the common denominator here of guys that have underperformed early and this team falls behind? And again, not putting it all on Brock Boeser, but if he's here and he's making 6.5 or whatever it is, he's got to live up to that. It can't be late February when games don't matter and, look at the strong finish. Hit the ground running. Again, the hand injury, you can't prepare for that. Whatever. It just kind of feels like time is running out on all the reasons things haven't happened for Brock Boeser. So if he's back, he has to be at the front of the line, pulling the rope in the right direction for the
Vancouver. And go to one of these skating gurus. Add that extra gear that Bill Horvath was able to find.
Yes, please.
He can redefine his career if he does that.
Well, because that's becoming a must now. Year in, year out, the league gets faster, and he looks more sluggish.
Yeah, my overarching sense being in the room there the other day, and they brought them out in waves of 4, and I was trying to read into who was with which group, but when Philip Hronik was at the podium with the first group of Miller and Paterson and Boeser, I was like, okay, I think everything's out the window here. Whatever the case, I get a sense, and we've done enough of these locker cleanout days, 7 years of the last 8 without playoffs. Trust me, I've been around, seen enough of these, but I get a sense that this group, forget the coaching change, I think the players, the star players, realize there is enough on this roster now. It is time. It's time for this group to make some headway, to gain some traction. And as I look at the start of the Stanley Cup playoffs, there are 6 teams in the NHL playoffs with a player who had more points than Elias Pettersson. There are no teams in the NHL playoffs with a defenseman that had more points than Quinn Hughes, Josh Morrissey of Winnipeg tied, and obviously Erik Karlsson not going to the playoffs. You add in an 80-point guy in JT Miller, a 40-goal scorer in Andrei Kuzmenko, and Thatcher Demko when healthy. The bones are there for this group, and so I sense some frustration. There is a belief, but I also sensed a little bit of frustration that it's now on management to get the cap sorted out by whatever means necessary and to fill around the edges with support players that are going to allow those star players to lead this team across the playoff bar.
Ilya Mikheyev was there, and I can't help but think that, it's a reminder of an important piece that was really lost for a significant portion of the season. Like Ilya Mikheyev, even the shadow of Ilya Mikheyev that we saw was pretty good. And if he's healthier than that and faster than that, Ilya Mikheyev's a nice player that will help this team.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, speed is his calling card. You hope with today's modern medicine that the surgery, it's never routine, but I think it's fairly procedural and with an off season to recover. And he sounded like he was going to stay here in Vancouver for the most part to be under the watch of the Canucks medical team, which that's
good, bad, yes.
Exactly. But that's the plan at the very least. And you're right. Like, he was never healthy. He got hurt in the preseason and then tried to play through this injury, and so we wondered why we didn't see this, bolts of lightning the way that we had the years before in Toronto, where he was truly in a straight line faster than almost anybody in the National Hockey League, and penalty kill as well. That's an area that he was signed to help, and who knows what percentage he was at, but it wasn't 100%, and then ultimately they had to shut him down at the All-Star break. So, yeah, a bit of a forgotten man there, and there's a couple of ways of looking at it. One is Phil DiGiuseppe gave the Canucks what he could, but spent the last 20 games on a line with JT Miller and Brock Boeser. Was he a placeholder for a guy like Mikheyev? And I think you could make that argument that that's where Mikheyev would slot in. Or we saw Mikheyev had success, as most guys did, when they got an opportunity to play with Paterson, Kuzmenko on the other side. So either way, I think Mikheyev is a top 6 forward when healthy for the Vancouver Canucks. And so, a healthy Thatcher Demko, a healthy Ilya Mikheyev. I mean, there are no promises. There's going to be injuries every year. It's contact sport. But yes, I think
the 40-game injuries are different. Yeah.
Yeah, and the hope is that, yes, this guy with that element that he can bring that's above league average in terms of his speed, and, puck pursuit and get in on the forecheck and then the penalty kill as well. Like, there's a role that he can play on this team without a doubt. And you're right, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, but there he was. I was a little surprised that he was propped up. And, of course, I was really surprised to see Tanner Pearson walk through the door and take his spot at the dais.
That was my next question, Jeff. I know you were surprised to see him, and we heard from him earlier in the program. Boy, the guy sounds so down, and yet, at least publicly, is not yet willing to open up on the Vancouver Canucks, even with the potential of an NHL grievance coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, generally, I mean, my surprise was generally injured players aren't made available. Now, it's the end of the season. But I kind of thought maybe somebody from the Pearson camp wouldn't want him to misstep at a microphone either. And so it was sort of this delicate dance. I mean, I'm glad he did. And, he didn't have a ton of patience early on. And then I think he recognized, we haven't had access to him since November through this ordeal. And so he kind of warmed up a little bit. But you're right, didn't want to, pull back the curtain too far, and yet left a lot to read between the lines and absolute frustration, not just about what's going on with his hockey career, but when he talked about, I just want to be a dad and a husband. I want to be able to play with my kids. And the hand is still heavily bandaged with a big splint on it. Like he's not living a normal life. And then I asked him about, because I like the mindset where he said, I have to, look at this offseason like I'm still a hockey player. But then the follow-up was, how do you train? In a league that's getting faster every year, speed was never his thing. Now, it's his hand, it's not his feet, so he can still do cardio workouts and those types of things, I would imagine. But in terms of lifting weights or whatever he does, for his off-season training, it's going to be hampered. And so just looking at him and reading his body language and sort of hearing the frustration in his voice feels like a long shot to me. I'm not a doctor, but it's 4 months, but those will go by in a hurry here. And I don't know. I just don't know how he's going to be ready for training camp next season.
One of the other themes, Jeff, most notably via JT Miller, Quinn Hughes, but others as well, is, boy, just how much of a cluster things were at the beginning of the season. Pick up on that, please. Yeah,
and we all watched it unfold. And certainly, Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford at times publicly threw darts at Bruce Boudreau for his training camp and then the preseason, and obviously they stumble out of the gates with the 7 losses. Look, talk is cheap. Ultimately, they're going to be measured by what they do on the ice, but these guys were in different groups. Like Quinn Hughes wasn't out there. Maybe he was somewhere in another room listening, but he wasn't there beside JT Miller when JT Miller talked about what you had mentioned, just how things were off the rails, obviously, and now there's so much more cohesion, and guys understand they have defined roles, and everybody just seems to be on the same page. And then Quinn Hughes came out and said basically the same thing and just talked about how, it wasn't fair to Bruce, but it probably had to happen. I thought it was interesting to hear from Quinn Hughes. And then he went back to late last season as well, where, they were winning some hockey games, but as we all watched, there were still issues. There were loose ends around this group. And so, one of the overarching themes leaving that room the other day was, there's still a ton of work to do, but they feel more cohesive at the end of the season under Rick Tocchet than they did at the end of last season with Bruce Boudreau. And it was so clear that the players could sense the same animosity from management to the head coach at this time last year that we all did. So this wasn't a figment of, outside forces trying to, manufacture stories around the Vancouver Canucks. The players were talking about, they could feel it themselves. And they're the ones that are closest to it. So, for people that want to believe in this group, you have to hope that these are positives. Again, they're going to be judged by what they do on the ice, and they can say all the right things at the locker clear-out day. Again, we've done this way too many times here in recent memory. But, the things that were said were a little bit different this year compared to many of those same exit availabilities of years gone by.
I'll ask you both again. It was a very nice record under Rick Tocchet after he took over, granted against a weak schedule and winningless games. I believe it was 7-3-2 to close up the season from sort of the middle to end of March all the way through. After listening to these guys, do we believe that something was achieved here under Tocchet? Do we believe that a corner has been turned and that they're going to be a better hockey club because of the new coach being introduced this season, mid-season, when the puck drops in October?
I don't attribute causation to it. Same thing. I mean, the numbers were there at the beginning of February. The easiest schedule in the National Hockey League. There was only one way direction for them to go, and they get their starting goaltender back. I think those conditions, more than anything else, are the reason for the wins.
Jeff?
Yeah, well, look, were they better under Rick Tocchet over 36 games than they were Bruce Boudreau? Yeah, they picked up more points in the standings, but a lot of that attributable to the soft schedule that we all knew was coming. But under Rick Tocchet, by points percentage, they were 13th best in the National Hockey League. So it felt like they were better, I think, than they ultimately were. Their goals for and against, I mean, I think the goal differential was +5, so that was with Thatcher Demko for the final 20 games as well. Penalty kill was better, but guess what? It couldn't be any worse, right? Like, it only had one way to go. Penalty kill under Rick Tocchet, I think we were blinded by all the shorthanded goals. It was 78%, where for the season average, it was just a shade over 70. So there's a ton of work to be done there. And again, that's where a guy like Ilya Mikheyev can help. And obviously having Thatcher Demko for an entire season, you'd like to think would produce a bump there. But yeah, I mean, the final 20 games, they won 13 of them. Of those 13 wins, 10 were against non-playoff teams. So, they struggled to beat Arizona. They struggled to beat Anaheim. Like, I hope that there is an honest assessment by this management group and coaching staff that, yes, they won, but they scraped by some of these other teams that were trying to lose hockey games as the Canucks were over there in the passing lane, ripping past them in the standings for whatever reason. And beyond picking up points in the standings, I'm not really sure what was accomplished over the final 20 or 25 games of the season.
And the Canucks weren't doing it in a sports car. It was like a modified 83 Datsun. But they were feeling like it was a sports car.
Yeah, but it had a sunroof, right?
Yes, it did. Power windows, too.
Souped up that Tercel.
Yeah.
Good stuff, Jeff. We'll talk tomorrow on the managers and the coach, of course, and we still got some more players to talk about later in the week. Thank you for this, my friend.
All right, guys. Thanks.